Hello, everyone. Professor Philip Travis, and it is week 10. We are here at the end of the term, here in our post-war Europe course. And this week we're going to be reading from our Jute book. We're going to be reading chapter 20, 21, and the epilogue. And part of the reading relates to what is going to be the factoid for today, which pertains to Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a kind of unique state during the Cold War period in Europe. After World War II, of course, Yugoslavia became a communist country. It was led by Tito during the Cold War, most of the Cold War. And it was interesting as a case, though, because Yugoslavia was not a Warsaw Pact country. They were not part of the Soviet Union, but rather Yugoslavia was sort of strongly independent. It was a country that chose to be a communist socialist worker state, but chose to be separate from the sort of model of Stalinism and the Soviet Union. And so as a result of this, Yugoslavia was really one of the premier sort of non-aligned states during the Cold War period. You had this bipolar world that we've talked about, where you had two major hegemonic powers, the United States and its allies, the Soviet Union and its allies, sort of dividing the world off into sort of bipolar spheres. Capitalist and ideally democratic states surrounding the United States, communist Soviet states surrounding the Soviet Union, or communist states surrounding the Soviet Union. And then both of those countries went to great lengths to sort of compete for influence in the developing world. Well, some countries in parts of areas like southeastern Europe, of course, Yugoslavia, you can see on the smaller map here, Yugoslavia is in the Balkans region of southeastern Europe. Countries like Yugoslavia, India, Egypt became countries that were known as non-aligned countries, meaning as those two bipolar powers, the Soviet Union and the United States and their allies, were sort of divided off into separate camps and were not participating in consistent and meaningful sort of trade and economic relations. And as they compete and fought over the developing world, non-aligned countries sought to basically not align with either of them, and sought to promote productive relationships as best as possible both ways. And so they sought to, in some cases, potentially reap opportunities from a relationship with the West, and also with, when opportune, with the East, the Soviet Union and other powers. And Yugoslavia really became sort of a premier example of a non-aligned state during the Cold War, an example of a communist power during the Cold War that was not itself aligned with the greater sort of Soviet bloc. So we'll talk more about this in just a moment. But real quick, a couple other announcements. Of course, it's the last week, so we should be working on our final papers. Paper length 6 to 9 pages. Please do not go under 6 pages. And the 6 pages does refer to the text, so it doesn't include a bibliography. All papers should, of course, include a bibliography. They should all be cited in footnotes. Please use footnotes. Do not use endnotes, but use footnotes in Chicago style, and have a bibliography in alphabetical order also in Chicago style. And, of course, I have the link for the free online Chicago-style notation guide in modules. There's also in modules, of course, a checklist for the essay, and the essay is due Wednesday of exam week, so we have a little time on this. It's not due till Wednesday of exam week, so we have about a week and a half before it's finally due. But as you work on it, make sure you look at the checklist and send me any emails that you have pertaining to questions you might have as you work on revising that essay and submitting it. Remember, it's very important to develop an introduction that sort of draws the audience in, draws the reader in, by setting up the context of the essay. It's very important to have a thesis that demonstrates a clear and specific point, but also a point that involves a level of analysis, right? The paper should make a point that requires historical evidence to demonstrate, okay? So if you were making, if you were writing a paper about Yugoslavia, just saying that Yugoslavia was a non-aligned communist country would obviously not be a very good thesis, because that's just kind of a statement of fact. It doesn't really require you to provide evidence to demonstrate that. So you would want to develop a thesis that required greater analysis, focused and specific, but also delivering a point that the paper will then demonstrate through evidence. Remember, in the introduction, tell the reader, this is the point of this paper. This is what this paper is going to demonstrate. And then in the body of the paper is where you provide the historical academic evidence that demonstrates that point. So that'll be due Wednesday of exam week. Our final exam in this class, which is not cumulative, it is an exam that covers all the material since our last exam. That exam is due Sunday. So the end of this week, due by midnight, by Sunday, by the end of day on Sunday. And that exam is like the first exam. You'll have some multiple choice, true, false types of questions, and then you will write a major essay. And please see the study guide in there for the topic areas for the essay. Okay, so factoid for this week relates to Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, of course, was a united country under the leadership of Tito during the Cold War. But of course, when Tito died, and as the Cold War came to an end, Yugoslavia would ultimately tear itself apart in a number of devastating conflicts, conflicts that brought the involvement, in some cases, of countries like the United States and its allies in Western Europe. Yugoslavia, you see today, these are the former countries of Yugoslavia: Serbia, Macedonia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and of course Sarajevo is probably where you know. That's the city, of course, where Franz Ferdinand was assassinated at the outset of the First World War. Croatia and Slovenia. This country down here, Kosovo, is a semi-recognized country, and this was one of the countries that was created during the wars in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s. And in multiple cases in the conflicts associated with countries like Kosovo, conflicts between Serbia, Bosnia, Croatia, Kosovo, so forth, there were cases of genocide, of course. And this is a very diverse region of the world. So you have countries, for example, Kosovo is almost entirely a Muslim country. And of course, this speaks to the long-ranging influence of the Ottoman Empire in this region. Serbia, and of course, this is a semi-autonomous region of Serbia. It is part of Serbia, but it's a semi-autonomous region of Serbia. Serbia, of course, is a largely Orthodox Christian country. Bosnia is a Muslim country, but there's a lot of Christians that live in Bosnia and parts of Bosnia. There's a lot of individuals that live in Bosnia that identify as being Serbian, but it is a majority Muslim country. And of course, in Bosnia was the sites of one of the cases of genocide, ethnic cleansing during those conflicts in the 1990s. And we'll be reading about some of these in class this week. Before Yugoslavia broke up, and the fracturing of Yugoslavia has become, sometimes it's become an adjective for larger countries breaking into smaller parts, and it's become known in some cases as balkanization. As Yugoslavia broke up, if you go back during the Cold War period, and this is the factoid right here, Yugoslavia tried to, as a non-aligned state, didn't try to, it did, though you might argue not very successfully. Yugoslavia entered the American automakers market. I mean, it was an international automakers market, but building a car called the Yugo. And the Yugo, you may have seen in the 1980s on American streets. They were sold in the United States, and it was a car that was sort of built by capitalists as well as sort of communist figures within Yugoslavia. It was modeled on the Italian Fiat, and it was an attempt by Yugoslavia to sort of enter the Western the Western sort of automakers market. And ultimately, the Yugo became known as an utter automobile failure. The car, whether or not it was deserved or not, the car became associated with being a very cheap and economical small car, very cheap and economical, but a very poorly engineered, poorly designed car became its reputation. So the factoid for this week, we're looking at Yugoslavia a little bit this week, as well as we're looking at Europe in the 21st century and the legacy of this period of time in post-war Europe that we've been looking at. But the factoid of this week relates to Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, a non-aligned communist socialist state that sought to attempt to enter the Western automakers market with the production of the Yugo, which was made for a number of years, primarily in the 1980s. Not email me, post that factoid in the extra credit discussion board no later than Wednesday by midnight and get the extra bonus point added to the test score at the end of the term. And I hope everyone has really enjoyed this class. I look forward. I know there's a lot of familiar folks in this class already, and so I hope to see some of you who haven't taken all of my classes yet in another class of mine in the future. So hopefully I'll be seeing some of you in upcoming terms. But I hope it's been a great term, and it's been my pleasure. And I hope we learned a lot in this term. I hope it's been a sort of inspiring experience in learning about post-war Europe. So have a great week. Let me know if you have any questions.